in this segment, I'll ask you, what do you think worked better in the sequel compared to the original? And, or conversely, what did you like about this movie? Floor is yours. Take it away.
All right. I think what worked better in the sequel compared to the original is a lot of the star power. So the cameos that they brought in, the small, performances that they, or small, like, people show up, and like you have like Flula Borg in here, you have President Obama, you have, we talked about Snoop Dogg, Keegan Michael Key, and just the sheer number of people that they brought in, and each of these had their own moments. And I think that those minor characters worked a little bit better this time around than the first time, where they kind of had characters like they had McLovin in the first one, and some of those obscure characters that they had. I think they hit home a little bit the second time, just because you're more bought into the universe and you're tied into the story.
Might have a little bit bigger budget,
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure if the first one was as successful and then coming around for a second. Something I think the character work did a little bit better. So they really leaned heavily into the Barden Bellas this time versus the first time around. They kind of focused on both sides. You had the Troublemakers and Barden Bellas, and they split the time. This one was more Bella focused, and you have your new characters that you brought in that they leaned in heavily to being part of the Bellas. So I think those kind of things worked well. The stuff I liked about this movie is I enjoyed the performances, like the musical numbers. I think they really tried to demonstrate the talent a bit more, whereas the first time that all the lead up performances were kind of trying to show that they were struggling. So they weren't as good as they could be. They weren't working together. And this time around, they get to be kind of a mess a little bit for they to like rein it in and bring it in for this big end performance. But I definitely enjoyed the middle performances a lot better this time than the first one.
For sure. I think that's fair. As for me, I really like the German group. Like you have, and I'm going to butcher their names, but, Brigitte Hjort Sorensen and Flula Borg, they were excellent. I mean, Das Machine, was that the name? That was the name of the group, right?
Das Sound Machine. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Das Sound Machine. They were excellent. I mean, if I'm being honest, they probably should have won in the end as well.
Yeah, I was saving that point to make, but they absolutely should have won that finale.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that. We'll circle back to that. But speaking of Flula Borg, I just want to give a fun fact. I'm probably the only person in the world who knows this, but my first experience actually seeing Flula Borg on my TV screen was like 10, 15 years ago, somewhere in ballpark around there. When I would watch the NFL Network, and he would sometimes appear on like those top 10 shows of like top 10 follies or whatever, right? And he would sometimes be on there, and he'd provide like this comedic kind of insight. They kind of do that sometimes. They'd have people on there who are comedians to kind of, something different. They're a little bit different perspective on certain things like that. But he would actually show up for some of that kind of stuff. So I recognize him immediately from there. And to see him in this movie is like, wow, like this guy's pretty cool. I want to check out more of his stuff now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, like he looked familiar. I couldn't put my finger on where I'd seen him from, but you saying that, like I remember those two. But I definitely recognize him more now after the fact.
Yeah, and like you said, like the talent and we mentioned this earlier, the talent in the movie is just crazy. The performances are really good. The music's really good. I would even say like the recording booth scene with Snoop Dogg and Keegan Michael Key. Keegan Michael Key in general is just awesome. Him, Key and Peele was a great show, and both of those dudes are insanely talented and really good at what they do. And just so good. And like I would even say, one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie was the campfire song when they bring back "When I'm Gone." Like it was such a cool touch that tied into the story like really well in that moment.
Yeah, it gave some levity to the series of scenes that had kind of a lot of comedic points, and then you get to it really brings it home there. You kind of start to feel for them, like they're all coming to the end of an era. They're graduating college and moving on, and they don't know what's going to happen next, and so you kind of feel that, despite the fact that just before this, they were all laying in I don't know if it was before or after, but like they're all laying in a tent head by head next to each other, and having that whole scene where they're singing in the woods and getting caught up in a a booby trap and those type of things. Like, so to be able to give you an emotional point right after all that, that's kind of powerful. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that this movie does well is and I would argue some comedies, to me anyway, the mark of a good comedy is one that's not afraid to have those kind of moments in it. Like I feel like a lot of times if you watch a comedy and it's just straight comedy the whole way through, like you're not getting the emotion, you're not getting story flow, you're not getting any of that. It tells me that they're too scared to do some of that stuff, and to
Mm-hmm.
me that kind of comes off as they're like the quality doesn't quite hit for me when they're afraid to go for that. It tells me they're afraid of that. So the fact that this movie does that, even the scene with Amy and Bumper when he
Mm-hmm.
says that he wants to date her and she's like no, like even that moment where like yeah there's a little bit of comedic. I mean those characters in general are just comedic, but to have
Yeah,
moments like that between them.
the character Bumper. They've spent the entire movie and then the beginning of this one making him dislikable, and in that moment you kind of feel for him.
Exactly. Yeah, and so like moments like that. There's obviously like the romance storyline with Benji and Haley Steinfeld's character, whose name escapes me off the top of my head, but it's Haley Steinfeld. You remember her and not so much her character. I think is the idea from the movie
Yeah,
because of her
absolutely.
career.
Emily is her name.
Emily. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, the legacy.
Yes, her mom was a Bella.
Yes.
Yeah,
So even that storyline.
yeah, that for sure. And like some other things that I think were stronger in this, I definitely, if you're looking at trends between 1, 2, and 3, you have your final performance, which we'll get to. You have your riff off scene where they do that game where they kind of they play categories and they jump from whatever the last word one finished on, the next one has to start on with a new song. I thought that stuff's fantastic. I understand it's not really improvised. The writers put it in there and they play it, but just the notion that people would play something like that, and that's really cool to me. I definitely think the riff off scene in this one was better than the first one. I think maybe the music was more current and seeing there. I mean, looking back to the first movie, Foreigners feels like the first time my dad used to play that song in his band, and so that kind of resonated for me a little bit. But this time you get some country, you get Taylor Swift, you get Carrie Underwood, you get more current stuff. I enjoyed the riff off scene a lot more this time around, and maybe it's because the different groups that were there rather than it being in the college drained pool and there. But I thought that they did a good job with that, and I thought when we get into the final performance, we'll give our thoughts there. But we'll put that under things I thought that they did better in the original, the first movie.
For sure.